The air in Julian Finch's study smelled of old money and fresh death. Detective Miles Corbin stood in the center of the Persian rug, his hands tucked into the pockets of his trench coat, surveying the scene. The police tape was a stark yellow, lying against the mahogany bookshelves, and the flashing blue and red lights from outside painted a macabre dancing spectacle on the walls. Julian Finch, CEO of a prominent tech firm, lay sprawled on the floor, a single precise gunshot wound to his chest. The room was ransacked, drawers pulled out, papers strewn everywhere, and the safe in the corner stood open and empty. It was a classic by-the-book case of a robbery gone wrong. Too classic, Miles thought. He'd seen 100 scenes like this in his 20 years on the force. The desperate, panicked scramble for valuables, the violent, almost gratuitous act of killing, when a life was worth less than a few $1,000s. But something here felt curated. The overturned chair didn't look knocked over. It looked placed. The chaos of the papers on the floor felt more like a theatrical flourish than genuine panic. It was a still life of violence, perfect in its imperfections. "Robbery, boss?" Officer Lena Diaz asked, her voice a low murmur beside him. She was new, sharp, and still saw the world in black and white. "That's what it looks like, Lena," Miles replied, his gaze fixed on the victim. Julian Finch was a caricature of a powerful man in death. Expensive suit, polished shoes, a jawline that suggested a life of privilege. His face was frozen in an expression of surprise, not fear. Surprise. As if he knew the person who shot him, but had not expected the finality of the act. "The wife is in the living room," Lena said, consulting her notebook. "A patrolman said she's remarkably calm. Name is Alara Finch, found the body." Miles felt a prickle of unease. He walked past the uniformed officers and forensic team, their movements a quiet, professional hum. He found Alara sitting on a cream-colored sofa, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She was small, delicate, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes that were the pale, washed-out blue of a winter sky. She held a ceramic mug in her hands, its contents long since gone cold. "Mrs. Finch?" Miles asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. She looked up, her expression placid. There were no tears, no trembling hands, no hysterical sobs. Just a quiet, composed stillness that felt as out of place as a swan in a sewer. "Detective Corbin," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "My husband's name was Julian." He sat in an armchair opposite her, not out of courtesy, but because he needed to be at eye level. "I know this is a difficult time. Can you tell me what happened?" She recited her story like a well-rehearsed script. She and Julian had dinner. He went to his study to work. She stayed in the living room to read. A little after 10, she heard a crash from the study, followed by a muffled bang. She hid in the master bedroom closet, terrified, until she heard silence. She called 911 from her cell phone, and then, with immense trepidation, came out to find... "This? Did you see anyone?" Miles asked. "No, I didn't dare, I just hid, I was so scared." She said the words perfectly, the emotion of scared a note-perfect chord. But her eyes were empty. Not empty with grief, but empty like a vase from which the flowers have been removed. Miles nodded slowly. Her story was plausible, almost too plausible. There was nothing he could trip her up on. Her calm was a logical response for someone in shock, for someone who had gone into survival mode. Yet his gut, that old, worn-out compass, was pointing in a different direction. He needed to see her reaction to something raw, something unexpected. He needed to get a true glimpse of the woman behind the perfect mask. "Mrs. Finch," he said, leaning forward just a fraction. "The medical examiner said your husband died instantly. He didn't suffer." The words were a standard courtesy, a small, gentle comfort offered to a grieving widow. He watched her face, her hands on the mug, her shoulders under the blanket. Everything remained exactly the same. No tear, no flicker of gratitude, no subtle sigh of relief. Miles stood up, thanked her for her time, and told her a car would take her to the station later to give a formal statement. As he turned to leave, he said, almost as an afterthought, "You know, Julian was shot in the chest, at close range. He was a tall man, so the shooter had to be close. Face to face almost. He didn't turn around. He just waited, his back to her, listening. There was a pause, a beat of silence in the humming chaos of the house. Then, the faintest sound, like the brush of a moth's wing. It was the sound of a woman's breath, released. A long, slow, quiet exhale that carried no sadness, no fear, but an unmistakable weightlessness. It was the sound of a person who had been holding their breath for a very, very long time, and had just realized they could finally breathe again. Miles turned, slowly. Alara's face was still placid, but for a single, brief, and utterly chilling moment, her lips curved upward. It was not a smile of glee or victory, but one of pure, unadulterated, bone-deep relief. It was a fleeting mask of satisfaction that she had tried to pull back immediately to replace with her practiced mask of sorrow, but Miles had seen it. He had seen the truth. The interrogation room was a sterile box of white walls and a single steel table. Miles sat opposite Alara Finch, a steaming mug of lukewarm coffee in front of him. Lena sat in the corner, taking notes, her young eyes still seeing this as a procedural formality. To her, Alara was just a victim, a very calm victim. "Mrs. Finch, let's go over your movements again," Miles began. He wasn't looking for a lie in her words. He was looking for a break in her composure. She went through the motions again. Dinner, his study, her book, the noise, the closet. The story was airtight. She hadn't even flinched when he mentioned the missing valuables. She said they were all replaceable. Her demeanor suggested a woman who had so much she wouldn't notice the absence of a few trinkets. "What kind of valuables were they?" Miles asked. "Oh, jewelry. Some cash from the safe. My engagement ring. It's all gone," she said, her voice flat. There was no sadness for the sentimental value of the ring. Just a simple factual statement. Miles let a long silence hang, in the air. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering. He was no longer a detective. He was a human being, looking at another human being, trying to find a shared thread of truth. "Mrs. Finch," he said, his voice dropping to a low, conversational tone. "Your husband had a busy week, didn't he? A lot of meetings. He was a very powerful man." "Yes," she said simply. "Power can be a corrosive thing, can't it? It changes people. It makes them possessive." He watched her face. The slight tightening of the skin around her eyes, a fleeting but palpable tension that dissipated just as quickly. He wasn't talking about money anymore. He was talking about a different kind of currency. Control. He started a new line of questioning, seemingly disconnected. He asked about her life before she met Julian. She was an art history major. She used to paint. "I had to give it up," she said, almost to herself. "Julian said my art was childish, that it wasn't a worthwhile pursuit." She caught herself, her expression closing off again. "He was just trying to protect me from disappointment." Was he? Miles's voice was gentle, almost empathetic. He had a daughter Alara's age. He knew the subtle ways control could be disguised as care. "He was very controlling about money," she continued, as if compelled to tell him more. "He handled all the accounts. He told me it was to keep me safe. He said I was too fragile for the stress of finances." She was talking now, not just reciting a script. She was finally starting to show the cracks in the dam. "What about friends, Mrs. Finch? Did you have many?" "He said my friends were a bad influence. They were too bohemian. He preferred that I spend my time at home." Miles saw it all. Now. He saw the beautiful bird in a gilded cage. He saw the life of a woman slowly, meticulously, being stripped of everything that defined her, all under the guise of love and protection. The plundering of the study, the overturned furniture, the missing jewels. It was all a charade. It was the chaos she wanted them to see, the narrative she had carefully constructed to hide the quiet, desperate act of a woman finally breaking free. Miles left the interrogation room and found Lena in the hallway. "Miles, what's going on? You're not getting anything new. It's a dead end." "It's not," Miles said, pulling her to a quiet corner. Everything she said, all Her answers, they're perfect. Too perfect. She's not grieving because she's not sad. She's free. And that exhaled breath, that wasn't a gasp of sorrow. It was a sigh of relief. Lena looked at him confused. You think she did it? I don't think. I know. It's in her eyes. It's in the way she doesn't miss a single beat of her story. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was a robbery gone right, for her. Miles knew he had to prove it. He ordered a deep dive into Julian Finch's life. He requested the security footage from the Finch estate, but found nothing. The cameras had all been turned off a week ago for maintenance, a detail Alara had conveniently and believably mentioned. But Miles's instincts were screaming. He had to find something that showed the real Julian Finch, the man only his wife knew. He got a warrant to search Julian's private office computer. It was heavily encrypted, and it took his best tech guy, a young man named Alex, almost 2 days to break through the firewalls. When he finally did, what they found was worse than Miles could have imagined. The first thing they saw was a set of folders, dated by month. Inside were files filled with security footage, not from the house, but from hidden cameras inside the study, the master bedroom, the living room. Cameras Alara had no idea existed. The files revealed a pattern of behavior that was as chilling as it was subtle. Julian, smiling at dinner with a camera fixed on his wife's face, watching every bite she took. Julian, shouting at her for speaking too loudly at a party. The cameras were everywhere, a constant, silent surveillance, a tool of his psychological torment. And then there were the emails. He found a long thread with Julian's lawyer, discussing prenuptial agreements and a new, stricter version. Julian had been planning to leave Alara and do it in a way that would leave her with nothing. No money, no assets, no power. He was going to turn her from a caged bird into a bird with its wings clipped and no home to fly to. Miles felt a cold fury. This wasn't about a husband and wife. It was about a predator and his prey. Miles sat in the interrogation room again, a stack of photos from Julian's computer in his hands. Alara sat opposite him, her composure still unnerving, a fragile fortress he was about to lay siege to. Mrs. Finch, he began, placing the first photograph on the table. It was a picture of her at a gallery opening, a glass of champagne in her hand, talking to a man. Julian was a few feet away, his face a mask of simmering rage. She glanced at it, her expression blank. He placed another one down, a screenshot of a text message from Julian to his lawyer. She's asking for access to her own money. Remind me to cut her off entirely. Still, no change. Her face remained a perfect, unreadable canvas. Miles pushed all the photos aside. He didn't need to show her any more of Julian's cruelty. He knew she had lived it. Mrs. Finch, Miles said, his voice soft. We know he watched you. We know he controlled every aspect of your life. We know he was planning to leave you, with nothing. We know this wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. This was your escape. He saw it then. The final definitive crack. A single tear, silent and shimmering, rolled down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of guilt. It was a tear of recognition, of finally being seen. I didn't want to hurt him, she whispered, her voice cracking. I just wanted it to stop. The dam broke. She told him everything. She had been planning it for months. The idea had started as a flicker of a thought, a wild, impossible dream, and had grown into a desperate, meticulously planned operation. She had paid a petty thief she knew from her days as a bohemian artist, a man named Leo, to stage the robbery. She was going to leave the study door unlocked. Leo was supposed to go in, take the few pre-selected valuables she had left out for him, and run. She had told him to make it look messy, to make it look like a crime of passion, not of careful planning. He was so angry when he saw the mess, she said, her hands trembling now. He said I had no right to make his space look like a pigsty. He started screaming at me, telling me I was worthless, that he should have never married me. He was going to hit me. Her voice was a thin, reedy sound, a melody of a pain she had held onto for too long. He was reaching for me, and I had the gun in my hand. He kept a loaded gun in his desk drawer for protection, he said. I had taken it out just in case Leo ran into him, just in case he was a threat. But Julian, he was the threat. And I don't know. I pulled the trigger. I wasn't even thinking. She sobbed, a deep, racking sound that shook her entire body. It was an accident. And then, once it was done, I knew. I knew he was gone. He couldn't hurt me anymore, and I called 911. Miles let her talk, the full, ugly truth of the matter pouring out of her. She was not a cold-blooded killer. She was a woman who had been pushed to her absolute limit, a caged bird who had finally found the strength to break free. Back at his desk, Miles sat in the low light of his office, the confession signed and in a folder on his desk. Lena sat opposite him, her face ashen. The perfect robbery gone wrong had been a meticulously planned escape, and the calm widow was a survivor who had finally fought back. "So what happens now?" she asked. Miles looked at the file. The evidence of Julian's abuse was undeniable, but the fact of the murder was also clear. Alara had confessed. The truth, in the eyes of the law, was still that she had killed her husband. But the larger truth, the truth Miles had seen in her face, was that she had been a victim for years. He knew what he had to do. The law was a cold, unfeeling machine, but he, Miles Corbin, was not. He had seen the terror in her eyes as she described Julian's rage. He had felt the immense relief that she had been holding on to for so long. He picked up his phone and called the district attorney. He laid out the case, not as a simple murder, but as a complicated narrative of abuse, control, and self-defense. He talked about the hidden cameras, the emails, the documented history of psychological torment. He emphasized the last-minute change of plans, the fact that the shooting was not a planned murder, but an act of desperation. The DA, a pragmatic man named Williams, listened patiently. "Miles, this is still a murder. She had an accomplice. She planned a fake robbery." "She planned to stage a robbery to get away, Williams," Miles insisted. "She didn't plan to kill him. She had a moment of pure terror, and she reacted. We have proof of his abuse. Her defense attorney can use that to argue for self-defense, or at the very least a lesser charge. We can't just put her away for a clean murder and ignore everything he did to her." Williams was silent for a long moment. Miles knew he was weighing the public relations nightmare of an alleged victim going on trial for murder against the political realities of a sympathetic jury and a mountain of evidence of the deceased's abuse. "All right, Miles," Williams finally said, his voice clipped. "We'll present the evidence of the abuse to the grand jury. We'll seek a lesser charge, manslaughter maybe. We'll let a jury decide. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a total loss either. It was a step towards a different kind of justice, one that acknowledged the complexities of the human heart, and not just the cold, hard facts of a crime." Miles hung up the phone. He looked at Alara's signed confession. It wasn't a document of guilt. It was a final, desperate declaration of her freedom. The world had seen a perfect crime, a botched robbery, but Miles had seen the truth in one single, quiet moment. In the relief on her face, he had not seen a killer. He had seen a survivor. And that was the only truth that mattered.